At this point, I'm sure most of you are already aware that crime is skyrocketing in major cities. It's led to a suburb called Buckhead to file for secession from the city of Atlanta to create their own city, their own police force. And it's not too dissimilar to what we saw in the Pacific Northwest with the Greater Idaho Movement, or in Colorado, where one county is trying to join Wyoming. People are not happy with Democrat leadership. If there's one thing that ties all of these secession movements together, it's that Democrats are running these places and people don't want to be a part of it anymore. At least in Buckhead, it's not necessarily to form or join a Republican government. They just don't want to be associated with the failures that is Atlanta. And crime is just getting worse. I mean, in New York, homelessness is up across the board. Riots are still sweeping through Portland. And we are seeing what appears to be a crumbling of American society or cultural institutions. In Portland, the entire police riot squad has resigned from the team. It's got a lot of people worried because tonight there's supposed to be some kind of big Antifa riot, and there's literally no cops to come and deal with it. What can they do? I guess ask other cops that weren't originally on the team to join the team, but I just don't think it's working. There's a viral video out of New York of a man robbing an 82-year-old man and stealing his cane. And then we get Mayor Lori Lightfoot. What happens in response to the massive crime waves? What happens in response to the failed leadership? Nothing but more failed leadership. Mayor Lori Lightfoot has just declared that racism is a public health crisis, and they're going to divert nearly $10 million from their COVID response to create equity zones in the city. Yeah, because that's exactly what people are concerned about. Now, many people are deciding to secede just from their localities. It's not necessarily to the point where we're going to see outright secession, but at least in Ohio, one state rep is calling for a convention of states. All of these things, while seemingly different, are grains of sand that are forming the giant sand heap. That's a saying for those who haven't heard me use the analogy before. How many grains of sand make a heap is the saying. Because at a certain point, you just know you got a pile of sand, but 10 grains? It's just scattered sand on the table. Each and every one of these stories is a tiny bit of the bigger picture. And on their own, they're not that big of a deal. I mean, some of these are. I mean, the suburb is trying to separate itself from Atlanta. It's the inverse of what we usually see. Small suburbs get annexed and eaten up by the bigger cities. When you put all these things together, what do you see? Cracks are forming. The United States is not in a good position. During the election, with Trump and Biden and the legal disputes, we had, I think it was 48 states were involved in a legal dispute, suing each other. Texas started it. I mean, that's crazy. And now we can see what's happening to the economy. We've got natural disasters. Man, I'm not entirely pessimistic, though. Hold on. Short-term pessimistic, perhaps. Long-term optimistic. Because the night is always darkest before the dawn. Perhaps this is some kind of realignment that we actually need. Perhaps people need that hard wake-up call because these cities can't just keep doing these things forever. I will stress to you, when we hear about police brutality, when we hear about climate change, these are problems of big cities made by city folk who vote for Democrats. These are the people who need to have a hard reckoning as to what's happening and what they vote for. Maybe that will change the system, and then they can learn to leave people alone. Well, I got a lot to talk about. Let's get started with this wealthy Atlanta suburb and why they are declaring I think they're outright saying they did secede, but they're hoping to get a referendum to make it official. Let's talk about this and then go through what's happening to these big cities and why Joe Biden, yes, I know, cliche, but Joe Biden is making it worse. Before we get started, my friends, head over to timcast.com, become a member, and get access to our exclusive members-only area. We had a great bonus segment with Michael Malice the other day. You know him, you love him. And we have recently brought on Cassandra Fairbanks to lead our newsroom, and we're going to be hiring many more people. We've already, I think, confirmed maybe 2 or 3 more people joining the newsroom. Your membership doesn't just get you access to these podcast shows. It allows us to expand, hire more people, and do the real journalism and the fact checking. And we will, and we'll do more. The more of you that sign up, the better. The more we are able to hire real journalists to do good work, and the more we will be able to report fairly what's really going on. So with that being said, let's jump to this first story. But don't forget, like this video, subscribe to this channel. And if you really think this work is important, please share this video. I think that it's fair to say We here at Timcast deserve to get more views than CNN does, but they're being propped up by YouTube. What we can do is leverage all of you who believe in the mission, in doing real journalism. If you really believe in this, please share. And not just my content, anybody else's that you think is doing a good job. You have to actively share the content so that we can challenge the establishment. Here's the first story, as reported by the Daily Mail. Wealthy Atlanta suburb of Buckhead files divorce papers to split from the city and create its own police force after jogger was shot amid skyrocketing crime rates. Now, this is interesting. They want their own police force. It's not too dissimilar to what we're seeing from this story from timcast.com. Portland police quit protest response unit in response to officer being indicted. Cops across the United States not able to do their jobs anymore. So take a look at Atlanta. Crime is skyrocketing. And what? I think it was Atlanta that recently had a drive-by shooting, and the cops just watched it happen. In Portland, not only can the cops do nothing about the riots every night, they're actually arresting the police now for doing their jobs. Now, we can argue they're not doing their jobs well, but come on, you throw a bunch of guys into a riot situation and say, deal with it. And then what happened was someone got hit. So they're like, okay, arrest the cop. Who would want to walk into that situation? You're going to be nuts. Well, here's the locals are saying in the Atlanta suburb. A leader in the movement for the wealthy Atlanta suburb of Buckhead to secede from the city has blasted the mayor over rising crime in the area, saying a divorce is inevitable. Quote, we filed our divorce papers at the city of Atlanta and our divorce is final, said Bill White, the CEO of the Buckhead City Committee, in an interview with Fox News on Thursday. White slammed Atlanta city leadership, including Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, accusing her of ignoring soaring crime in Buckhead and presiding over a demoralized and underfunded police department. It follows a shocking shooting in Buckhead on June 5th when a father of three, Andrew Worrell, was struck twice by bullets while jogging at around 8:35 a.m. He survived and has since been released from the hospital to recover at home. They are just not paying attention to the crime. The leadership vacuum is substantial, White said of Atlanta's elected officials. I don't like saying anything bad about Mayor Bottoms. I'm sure she is a nice human being, but she has completely let our officers down, he said. Now, my friends, you know that I'm from Chicago. I bring it up every so often. And I can tell you this, some of the highest crime rates in the nicest areas. Now, how can that be? You'd think it's the poor areas that suffer the most. In terms of crime, sort of, but not really. You see, the people from the poor areas go to the rich areas to rob people. So violent crime and robbery and possession crime, property crimes, they tend to happen in these wealthier areas. Now, a lot of violence does occur on the South Side due to gangs and honor attacks and things like that. But I'll tell you this, I grew up on the South Side. Only time I ever got mugged, I was actually hanging out on the North Side, and I was mugged by someone from my own neighborhood. It's kind of weird how that works, isn't it? So I'm not surprised that these wealthy individuals, wealthier, are saying, I don't want to be dealing with this anymore. Quote, they feel demoralized, underpaid, underrecognized, and being told not to fight crime in the way they would like to. We love the Atlanta Police Department, but we'll form Buckhead City with its own police department with significantly greater presence on the streets. A spokesperson for Mayor Bottoms did not immediately respond to an inquiry from Daily Mail. Bottoms, who was on President Joe Biden's short list of potential VP picks, has remained active on other fronts this week. On Wednesday, signing an order declaring all of Atlanta's city-owned bathroom all gender. Now, that's exactly the kind of leadership we need. Good job, Mayor Bottoms. While a man jogging down the street was shot twice, the one thing we're really concerned about is bathrooms. Bro, I don't care about bathrooms. I really, really don't. If somebody wants to use a bathroom, go ahead and use a bathroom. We got serious crime. We got people getting shot. Oh, I see your priorities are in order. The crime spike in Buckhead so far this year has alarmed residents. Through last week, aggravated assaults were up 52% in the wealthy enclave, compared to a rise of 26% citywide, according to an analysis of police data by WXIA TV. Robberies citywide were up just 2%, but in Buckhead, they're up 39%, while larceny from automobiles rose 40% in Buckhead and 27% citywide. Here's the proposed city of Buckhead. Amazing. Residents of Buckhead anticipate a referendum next year will allow them to secede from Atlanta. The boundaries of their proposed new city are seen above. That's interesting. What are the limits? Buckhead is a neighborhood, basically. They say it's a suburb, but it's part of Atlanta. So what's to stop them from going to any other jurisdiction surrounding the Buckhead area and asking them if they would like to join this new city? I don't see why they couldn't. Now, this is different than the other secession movements. This is a city in a state. They don't need congressional approval to move between states. They could just potentially make a referendum and leave. My personal opinion on the secession movement is that a government requires the consent of the governed, which means if Greater Idaho movement, the Eastern Oregon votes to secede, and they did, then it's done. As far as I'm concerned, we operate under the consent of the governed. You don't just get to tell us, you can impose your will on us. Law-abiding citizens who pay taxes have the right to choose how they are governed. If they want to change, so be it. Granted, I understand Idaho gets a say in the matter. We'll see what they say. And the federal government has to recognize it. So there is some complication there. But I think as far as it goes with Oregon, if the people say we no longer feel you represent us, well, then so be it. Check this out. Crime in Atlanta year-to-date annual change. It's getting crazy. The people of Buckhead have had enough, said White. The criminals here feel emboldened. White estimated nearly 80% of its community will vote in favor of the separation from Atlanta in a referendum expected to reach the ballot next year. Currently, a bill authorizing the referendum has been introduced in the Georgia House of Representatives, and the legislature will be able to vote on it in the 2022 session. So maybe nothing will happen. We'll see. Many of these secession movements could just be the precursor, because I assure you this, if the people feel this strongly, they're not just going to stop. They're going to sit there and they're going to scream, and the sentiment will only rise. Now in Portland, I can only imagine what's going to happen there tonight. The entire Portland Police Protest Response Unit has quit the team. Make this one simple because we did cover this quite a bit. The entire riot response for Portland has resigned. They're still cops, though. They're not quitting. They're resigning from the team. They refuse to answer riots because one officer hit someone who said they were a journalist during a riot. And this officer got indicted over it. Imagine that. Now, what I find funny about this is the cops still deciding they're going to stay on as cops. Bro, maybe you should quit if they're arresting and indicting your fellow officers for doing what they were asked to do. Riots are not easy situations. I've been in many situations where cops have been very disrespectful to the press, but I think there's a certain, we can be reasonable in certain terms, right? If there's a large group of people and they're throwing bricks at cops and you're standing alongside them and the cops run up and shove everybody, including you, well, if I was a journalist, I'm not going to be like, oh no, why'd they do it? I'd be like, well, I was standing with them and they probably didn't notice. They may not have, or maybe they didn't care. The point is, it's hard to know for sure. Now, if you're a journalist walking around filming and you're by yourself and a riot cop shoots you with a beanbag, yeah, okay, that's happened. That's scumbaggery. I was in Ferguson and I was wearing a bulletproof vest with a big press badge on it with a camera crew. And a cop goes, you can't come over here. It's press only. And I'm like, I'm press. And they're like, where's your press card? And I'm like, it's not a requirement to have a press card to be a journalist. And he grabbed the police patch, ripped it from my chest and threw it on the ground. I had a big press Velcro. I'm like, dude, activists aren't showing up with like beige bulletproof vests and camera crews like this. They do walk around with cameras, and sometimes there are activists pretending to be journalists for sure. But I've seen bad cops in these situations. Now, what are we getting? What do we get politically as our country is fracturing at its core? This is one of the most shocking things I've seen yet. Mayor Lori Lightfoot declares racism a public health crisis in Chicago. It's literally killing us. No, it isn't. This is evil. This woman is an evil human being, dividing people, stealing money from the COVID fund. Evil. Ideologues stealing our resources. Why are you all funding your own oppression? It's a good question, right? It's asked by Lauren Chen. CBS Chicago reports, Mayor Lori Lightfoot on Thursday declared systemic racism a public health crisis in Chicago, saying disparities in access to effective and affordable health care, the impact of racism on the mental health of people of color, and the subsequent difference in life expectancy is literally killing us. At almost every point in our city's history, sadly, racism has taken a devastating toll on the health and well-being of our residents of color, particularly those who are black. Question, which political party has run Chicago for nearly 100 years? The Democrats. And people keep voting for them. Corruption. That's the only thing I can say. Lightfoot said, without formally acknowledging this history and reality and the continuing impact of that infamous legacy, looking at the root cause of today's challenges, we will never be able to move forward as a city and fully provide our communities with the resources that we need to live happy, vibrant, and fulfilled lives. The mayor made an announcement in the North Lawndale neighborhood near the site of where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his family lived for 6 months in 1966, joining a campaign against racist housing policies. In declaring racism to be a public health crisis, Lightfoot joined several other cities around the nation that have made similar proclamations. Crime skyrockets. And what do we get across the country? I'm telling you, man, if you're not paying attention, our embassies are flying Black Lives Matter flags. It is a cult, racial, identitarian ideology, and you will not want to live in this system. And if we don't speak up, stand up, and say no now, it'll be too late. Unfortunately, I don't think the people of Chicago are going to do anything because most of them are probably just cultists. They're probably in the cult. They don't care about politics. They don't care about policy. They don't care about the suffering of the innocent. They simply care that Orange Man is bad and Trumpists are bad and the other is wrong. Republicans are awful. That's it. You'll notice that when talking to the media, they say Republicans all the time. They don't seem to talk about us, disaffected liberals, intellectual dark web types, the politically homeless, just the conservatives over and over and over again. Yeah, just Ben Shapiro. Well, other people exist too. Yeah, this is what's happening. Lightfoot, the city's first black woman mayor and first openly lesbian mayor, noted her parents grew up in the segregated Deep South and both had dreams that were never realized, largely due to the attitudes of the 1920s. She said her mother wanted to be a nurse and her father wanted to be a lawyer. Yeah, I'll tell you what I find particularly interesting. My family went through similar things, and they do not believe in what's being espoused here. Racial identitarianism was rejected by my family. 2 generations. Not Lori Lightfoot. Nope. Here we go. Chicago Department of Public Health Commissioner Dr. Allison Arwady said the death rate from diabetes among blacks is 70% higher than non-blacks in Chicago. The homicide rate among blacks in Chicago is 9 times higher than among non-blacks. Black infants are nearly 3 times as likely to die as non-black infants. Black people account for half of the city's residents living with HIV, and opioid-related overdose deaths among blacks is more than 3 times the rate among non-blacks. There is nothing natural about these statistics. They are unjust and they are preventable. Arwady announced the city will allocate $9.6 million in COVID-19 relief funds from the U.S. CDC to establish healthy Chicago equity zones, 6 geographic areas covering the entire city. Community groups in each of those 6 areas of the city will lead efforts to come up with targeted strategies to improve community wellness. City officials have chosen 6 organizations to lead those efforts in each of the 6 healthy Chicago equity zones. Amazing. They say the far south, near south, north central, northwest, southwest, and west zone. Ayesha Jocko, executive director of Westside United, said the goal is to decrease the life expectancy gap between the Loop and West Side, which currently stands at 14 years, by half by 2030. I grew up in Chicago. I know all about it. There are very poor white areas. Why don't they get access to this equity money? Why is the mayor taking money and allocating it towards minorities, specifically the black community in Chicago? I would not want a white person to do that for white people. I would not want that for an Asian person to do it for Asian people. Class is the problem. Now, there are a lot of poor areas of Chicago that are predominantly black, but there are also some poor white areas as well. If we focus on class, we make sure we don't leave anyone behind. But you know what? These people don't want that. These people want racial disparity. As I was told during Occupy Wall Street by a young black woman, an activist, she said, "It's our turn now." Your turn? Yeah, that's the way they view it. The only problem? Not everybody is part of the group of people that was oppressive to you. There was a guy in Alabama, and I think it was in Georgia, crossing state lines, targeting white people just because he hated them. Yeah, that's bad. Racism is bad. Violence. We don't want that. Well, people like Lori Lightfoot and these other bottoms in Atlanta, they're racial identitarians. They want this. They want more of it. They want racial segregation. Ibram X. Kendi has said he wants to reinstitute racial discrimination. That would mean they need to overturn the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but don't be surprised if they actually push for it. New York is just getting bad, man. Cane thief demands cash from 82-year-old NYC coffee buyer, shoves him to the ground. That's messed up. I saw this video. Absolutely messed up. These cities are being run into the ground. Daily Mail reports New Yorkers demand action as 8,000 homeless people remain in hotels in Midtown, where crime has spiked 170%. And mayoral hopeful Andrew Yang says residents should be able to go out without fear of being attacked. Wow. I can't believe a mayoral candidate would have to say that. You should be able to live here without being victimized. Are you implying that it happens to basically everybody? It happens a lot. It's getting worse. And these mayors aren't solving any of these problems. I like Andrew Yang. He has he had a very comprehensive campaign policy list. I was impressed by it. Not a big fan of the UBI thing, but he seemed to have a lot of good ideas. I'm not entirely convinced he's going to solve these problems. I'm not convinced that just having a permanent Democrat supermajority in all of these cities is ever going to solve anything, because they will remain to be beholden to the political party. Now, things may change. But as I mentioned, these are all fractures in the United States. From the Advertiser Tribune, McLean to introduce Convention of States resolution. State Rep Reardon McLean said he and State Rep Craig Riedel will introduce legislation next week designed to rein in the federal government. The size and scope of the federal government have long been unsustainable, and we have waited long enough for Congress to fix itself, the second-term lawmaker told the Advertiser Tribune. McLean and Riedel will propose a constitutional convention take place where like-minded lawmakers from all 50 states would meet and propose and potentially adopt changes to the Bill of Rights. The legislation complies with Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, McLean said. An Article 5 Convention of States. Right now, the Republican legislatures in the states, Republicans control just shy. I think they don't need that many more states. They have many of them, but they need a handful more states. So I don't think this is going to have any big impact. But my question, I suppose, for you is, do you think it ends here? Do you think that this story is just a one-off compared to everything else that's going on? Or do you think in the next 2 years, next 4 years, 6 years, do you think that more and more people will start getting angry as the left continually loses its mind, shrieking and screaming, stealing taxpayer funds to put ideological symbols in streets and on our embassies? This is not a popular movement. Black Lives Matter, Antifa, these things, they are not popular in the sense that they have a minority, a fringe minority of support in this country. In 2018, the number was 8%, 8. And yet they're stealing taxpayer dollars to paint the streets without approval. And people are upset about it. So what happens when Republicans, who apparently now have just raised record amounts of money, stage a comeback? What happens when 38 states have Republican legislatures and the Convention of States kicks off and that's it and they make that big change? It may come. Quote, the road to this end will be long and arduous, but the task at hand is critical to the sustainability of this great republic that we share. McLean serves District 87, which includes Wyandotte, Crawford, and Morrow counties, as well as portions of Marion and Seneca counties. In the Ohio House of Representatives, he serves on 3 committees. This is the 6th piece of legislation that McCain has been a primary sponsor of in 2021. None have moved past the House yet. So maybe it goes nowhere. Maybe this is just unfortunately, a feeble attempt. Maybe it's just the beginning, because I can't imagine things are going to get better. Now, I'm not going to harp too much on this point, but we are seeing a very, very serious crisis in California. A massive drought, historical. CNN reports a ranch is running out of water in the West's historic drought. In 85 years, it's not been this bad. California produces a lot of our food. There's already food shortages. Now there's a massive drought in California. I think things are going to get a lot worse. And I think what we need is a big push away from these big cities. But to all the people who want to live there, why don't you keep your cities and leave the rural folk to their rural lives? You know why? I got a garden. I got chickens. We're getting solar panels installed. We got our own water. We don't need to live in your big city with all of your problems, with all of your pollution and your grime and your slime and your corrupt cops. So you say, I don't need to live that way. I can be responsible for myself out in the middle of nowhere, and I can rest. I can rest my head easy, sleep well, knowing I'm not contributing to any of the problems you claim are happening. The left likes to come out and claim that the right wing is a bunch of fascists. Bro, the right is predominantly in rural areas where they mind their own effing business. They have their own houses. They have everything. Like a lot of these houses are off the grid to a certain degree. Off the grid in the sense where they have their own power. They have their own water. They have their own septic systems. They're not the ones pumping out the trash, destroying the world. That's you in the city. So I imagine it'll get worse. It's not just the drought. It's a natural disaster. I can't blame anybody for that. But check this out. Great resignation wave coming from companies. Really? That's right. Axios reports companies that made it through the pandemic in one piece now have a major new problem. More than a quarter of their employees may leave. Workers have had more than a year to reconsider work-life balance or career paths. And as the world opens back up, many of them will give their 2 weeks notice and make those changes they've been dreaming about. The Great Resignation is what economists are dubbing it. Okay. So what happens when our economy retracts by 25 to 40% because everybody quits their jobs? What do you think happens? Maybe the government intervenes and starts throwing money at people again, like they've been doing, which leads to even worse inflation. And the government has to throw more money at people because that's what they've been doing. And then you look at what's happening with BlackRock and the buying up all these homes. Let me put it this way. Those of us who are anti-establishment, be you a politically homeless individual, a disaffected liberal, a centrist, a moderate, Republican, conservative, whatever, we must win. Because if we don't, then what happens is authoritarian takeover of the United States. It's happening already. Like I mentioned, a small fraction of zealots, ideologues who are violent, have been seizing institutions, have been stealing taxpayer dollars. They're getting away with it. But I think there's reason to be optimistic. In the event that we cannot defeat the cult and the ideologues that are supporting the establishment, the seizing of property from the working class, and stealing COVID relief funds for their weird race programs. In the event we don't stop them, peaceful divorce is still on the tip of many people's tongues. Many people have talked about it. And when we see these local jurisdictions and counties now voting to secede, it seems like in the next 4 years, it could become a much more serious movement. And at the very least, what may end up happening is, okay, maybe the cultists can keep their big cities, and then the United States fractures into a bunch of different local jurisdictions, and it's bad for the world in a lot of ways. Maybe China then moves in and takes over, but at the very least, it's better than living under the boot of the cult. Take a look at this story from Bloomberg. America should become a nation of renters. The very features that made houses an affordable and stable investment are coming to an end. Bloomberg says the numbers paint a stark picture. After peaking at 69%, the homeownership rate fell, blah, 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 blah. Yes, this is an article from Bloomberg saying we should all be renters. Several articles have come out recently saying millennials hate owning homes. It's really weird. Let me tell you, millennials, you want to own property. If you buy a house and you've got and you're like, I can't deal with maintenance and the insurance. This is ridiculous. I don't want to deal with this. I want to move. It's easy. You call a rental management company. They take over. They cover repairs. You don't even think about it anymore. They get someone to move in who starts renting. That rent money goes towards paying off the mortgage. You get a cut of that rent. So a small percentage will go to the management company. So why tell people not to own property? Think about this story from Bloomberg Opinion. Why become a nation of renters? I mean, somebody owns the property. Who is it? BlackRock? Pension funds? Banks? Yeah. Because when you don't own anything, well, that's what they said, right? You will own nothing and you'll be happy. You'll have no way to transfer wealth to your children. And I think this is what we can expect unless we stand up and say no. People who live in the middle of nowhere, people who live in rural areas, as I mentioned, aren't the ones destroying the planet. So why should they not be able to own their own property and transfer it to their children? Why should this right be given to massive multinational corporations? Now think about this for 2 seconds. What's the logical conclusion of a nation of renters? Imagine if no one owned any property. It was owned by massive multinational corporations. One day there is a crisis and a lockdown. Again, people can't pay their rent. So when there's a massive debt accruing and they can't pay, what if the government just says we're going to seize up all the bad loans and buy into these properties? And now the government buys the debt from the business in a bailout. BlackRock buys up all the houses, right? People can't pay their mortgages because they lost their jobs, because they're resigning en masse, or because they just don't want to work, or because of a pandemic. Now BlackRock's sitting on a bunch of bad debt. Oh no, we're going to collapse. And if we do, the economy goes with it. The federal government comes in and says, we're going to bail you out, but that means we own a percentage of all of these homes, or we buy all of them. Now you officially live in government housing. No, we don't want to be a nation of renters. We want to be a decentralized network of capable, personally responsible individuals with the right to keep and bear arms and express themselves. That keeps us strong. This is an authoritarian takeover. As for these cities, these are the fissures, the cracks, the spiderwebbing of forming in the glass. Maybe, as I often say, it all just ends here. And next year I'll be like, wow, everything's back to normal. I don't see why that would be the case, though. The cracks don't just heal themselves. They get worse. But maybe, right? I can't see the future. Maybe this is the peak. Maybe we're now going to go right down the back end of that bell curve and it's going to go back to normal. I kind of don't think so. I think crime is going to get worse. I think the mayors are going to introduce more zealotry. People are going to reject it. And instead of solving the crimes, Atlanta is going to be changing bathrooms or something. Oh, then you're going to get more secession. Cities will be breaking apart from cities. States from, fractions of states will be in battle with each other. And eventually the U.S. just shatters. Not a good thing. Not at all. But we have no cohesive culture. And we have a bunch of corrupt Democrats running too much. The Republicans are pathetic, in my opinion. But the Democratic establishment, the neocons who joined them, are evil. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.